actually one of my most requested tutorials, and oddly enough, I don't have a lot of them. I actually made a tutorial a while back for a huge custom picture frame that I made for my dad's office, but it used dowels and a router, and it may have been a little more involved than most people are looking for. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I built 3 different style floating picture frames for this wall and how easy it is to cut plexiglass when you have the right tools. Before we get started, I did want to give a huge thank you and shout out to today's video sponsor, the Home Depot. As part of the prospective program, I'll be sharing about a handy new tool that I tried out for this project in this video, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Speaking of tools, all 3 frames require a miter saw or any saw really, wood glue, and a nail gun. And actually the nail gun is optional, but it just makes things go quicker. And as far as materials that each frame needs, Style 1 uses a square dowel and a 1x2. Style 2 uses a 1x2 and some 1/4 inch by 1 1/8 inch lattice trim. And Style 3 uses square dowels and 1/4 inch by 1 1/8 inch lattice trim. To make things easy to change out, I also used these turn buttons, or as I like to call them, twisty tabs, on the back to hold the plexiglass in place. But the first step to making any of the frames is cutting the plexiglass. Now normally I go to my local glass shop and have them cut my plexiglass and glass pieces for me. But because these frames are really small, they were gonna charge me an arm and a leg, and they were gonna take forever to cut me all of my little pieces that I needed. So I just went to Home Depot and grabbed some plexiglass sheets, and then I grabbed a couple of plexiglass sheets I had left over that I had the glass shop cut for me a while back and I never used. I designed some simple graphics on my computer and also used a little fabric patch that I won a few years ago at a conference for these frames. You can use a photo, a poster, fabric, or whatever you want to frame. I just cut them out and laid them out on the sheet how I liked the spacing, and then I marked where I wanted to cut the sheet. Now, I've used the cheap little hand knife that they claim will cut plexiglass before, and it was an absolutely horrific experience with very poor results. So this time I tried the new Ryobi 1+ HP compact cutoff tool with a plastic cutting blade and was thoroughly impressed with how quick and clean the cuts were. Now, what's pretty cool about this guy is that it's basically a drill turned 90 degrees. It's got a variable speed trigger and even has a reverse forward direction, just like a drill driver. It comes with a plastic and drywall blade, a metal cutoff wheel, and a diamond blade for cutting tile and cement board. You can learn more about the new Ryobi 1+ HP cutoff tool at the link in the description if you're interested. For cutting straight lines on the plexiglass, I just lined up a straight edge, clamped, and then ran the metal blade guard on the cutoff tool against it to make the cut. I did find that it cut best in this case with the switch in reverse. It seemed to just not melt as much that way. I cut 2 pieces identical in size for each item that I was framing. And once all the plexiglass was cut, I started making the frames. Style 1 is my personal favorite, so I'll start with that type of frame first. This frame is basically just a 1x2 wrapped around a square dowel frame. So I used 3/4 inch square dowels for this and set up my miter saw to cut 45 degrees. Now you don't have to miter these corners, you can leave it on 90 and just make simple butt joints if you prefer. You also don't need a miter saw for this, any saw that you can cut fairly straight with will work fine. I basically trimmed 4 pieces of square dowel with 45-degree miters on the ends so that when they all fit together, they would be just barely bigger than the plexiglass piece that I was putting in it. I applied wood glue to the corners and nailed them together with brad nails. If you're patient and you don't have a nail gun, simply glue and clamp until dry. I don't really know why I thought to do this on this particular frame, but I applied some clear Gorilla Glue and glued one of the plexiglass pieces onto the back side of this frame. In hindsight, this wasn't really necessary, and I didn't do it on the other 2 frames, but you can or cannot do this step if you want. After the glue had dried, I cut to fit 1x2 pieces with 45-degree mitered corners around this frame. Again, butt joints are fine here if you wanted to skip the mitered corners. I glued and nailed these 1x2s around the edges, leaving about 1/8 of an inch sticking out the back side of the plexiglass so that when I install the back plexiglass piece, it'll be flush all the way across the back side of the frame. Then I screwed these twisty tabs or turn buttons, whatever you want to call them, onto the back sides of the frame to hold the plexiglass in place. I'll go back and clean all the sawdust off of this plexiglass later, but for now I set this off to the side to make the next style frame. Style 2 is a little simpler and is made of 1x2s and 1/4 inch thick lattice trim. I began by cutting down the lattice pieces so that it would make a frame that the plexiglass would fit inside. Again, just like before, the mitered corners are optional. Once I had this lattice frame out, I dry fit the pieces together and then measured its overall size and cut 1x2 pieces to make a frame whose overall size matched that of the lattice frame. I glued and nailed the 1x2 frame together and clamped until dry. Then I flipped it upside down and glued the lattice frame onto the back side. I used a heavy object to hold these pieces in place until it was dry, and then I screwed the twisty tabs on the back to hold the plexiglass in place. Since the lattice is 1/4 inch thick and the plexiglass pieces are 1/8 of an inch thick, when I place 2 inside, everything should sit flush across the back side, just like the last frame. Again, I will go back and clean the sawdust off later, but for now, I moved on to the last style frame. Style 3 is the same concept as Style 1, but instead of using 1x2s, I use lattice to keep the frame a little thinner. So I cut 3/4 inch square dowels to make a frame the same size or slightly bigger than the plexiglass that I was framing, and I glued and nailed it together just like I did for the first frame. Then I cut lattice trim to wrap around that frame. This time, since I didn't glue the plexiglass onto the frame, I just glued the lattice trim on so that there was about 1/4 of an inch sticking off the back side of the square dowel, so that when the 2 pieces of 1/8 of an inch thick plexiglass are installed, it will be flush across the back. I didn't have any brad nails short enough to nail this frame on, so I simply glued and clamped until it was dry. If you don't have that many clamps, you could also use painter's tape or super glue if you wanted. Then, just like the last 2 frames, I installed twisty tabs to hold the plexiglass in place. The final step is cleanup and hanging. I used some glass cleaner to clean up all the sawdust, and then I used a piece of double-sided tape on the back side to make sure that the pictures stayed in place, then put the frames back together. To hang, you can use your standard sawtooth hangers for this. Simply place it on a shelf or use a drill to drill holes into the corners to run some paracord and hang it on a piece of wood dowel that you screwed into the wall. As you can see, making picture frames does not have to be complicated. This is a great beginner project that you can tackle with minimal tools and get as creative as you want. So now that my desk space is complete, I guess I should probably get back to work. I hope you've enjoyed this little project. There are plenty more coming your way, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on what's coming next. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy building!